Hello, this is a listening project specifically highlighting the women's voice within the game, brought to you by the Football Supporters Association and Offside Media Productions. In this 6-part series, leaders of football fan groups and other female trailblazers are joining me, Lynsey Hooper, to chat about the big issues facing fans right now. Today's episode is all about female voices in the game. So to join me for this one is Christine Seddon, who's Blackpool Supporters Trust board member and an FSA National Council member as well. Sue Watson, chair of West Ham United Supporters Trust, and Hannah Kumari, a Coventry fan and a performer, writer, director and producer of football-related work in the arts. So Hannah, female voices in the game, that could cover all sorts of different things, from phone-in shows to media coverage to down the pub. And I think we should start there with you. Do you feel like your voice is heard when you're watching football in any kind of environment?
Yeah, I mean, I feel quite confident in talking about football, but I think as a woman, in my experience, there's always that bit of anxiety that often you find that they are more male-dominated spaces, that there's an extra level of anxiety of maybe saying the wrong thing or getting a player's name wrong if you're talking about a game that you've watched, which obviously happens to everyone. But I think as a woman who likes men's professional football, there's always that element of you shouldn't really be there. So feeling like you have to perform or know everything, and that kind of pressure in a way that men probably don't feel that when talking about football.
And did you feel that from touring and doing all the shows and being in the arts in the way that you are, the reaction from the audience, you're actually there able to tell us what that reaction is like?
Yeah, I think through my play, it is a way of making my voice heard more. It's about my experiences in the 90s going to Coventry City when I was 14. So the character is 14 years old. I wanted to use the lens of a child because I think and have found it makes people more likely to engage and empathise with her. She's very likeable, but she's not a pushover, but she's giving her perspective on her experiences and the world around her in a way that I think makes it easier for people to engage. So I suppose, yeah, I have sort of found my voice through that play to some extent.
You've all got very different experiences to share, actually. Christine, I want to bring you in next because you were asked to be a spokesperson for the Trust after you phoned in on a radio phone-in show, which says to me one of two things. One, that you were a great speaker, but probably you were quite unusual.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it there. I was never sort of backward at coming forward in terms of radio phone-ins, but I was particularly fired up because of the problems that were happening at my football club at that time. And on this particular evening, I was particularly angry about something. And so it was a regional radio programme. And I rang up and basically, had a now amongst Blackpool fans quite famous rant. And so many Blackpool fans heard it, and I think what I said resonated with them. And say, as it was such a difficult time, the chair of Blackpool Supporters Trust also heard it, so contacted me and said, "Look, we'd really like you to speak for the Trust." And that's how it all began.
We are going to come and circle back to that. But I just want to bring in Sue as well, lastly. Sue, you are a very, very much a unique voice in the world of boards. So at West Ham United, you've already said to me before we started this that you don't come across many other women in your position.
That's correct. And just to pick up from what Christine's just said, I'm quite often contacted by various, including Sky, but radio shows, etc. And the comment I always get is, "Oh, well, you're unusual. As a woman, we'd like to get your voice on." So nothing to do with the fact that I might actually know something or have a valuable opinion about something, but the gender. And I'm really passionate about ensuring that the woman's voice is heard in football, because more and more women are now attending our game. And that's it. It is our game. And we have the right to be heard.
So let's pick apart and just bounce off each other with this as to the reasoning as to why you think there is a lack, especially when we look at the female voices on radio phone-in shows, as an example. You don't get that many. Why do you think that is? Is there an intimidation factor? Are there just not that many? I don't believe that. I look around football grounds now and the makeup of supporters is really diverse.
Can I just dive in there? Because I asked for a general kind of breakdown of the attendance at West Ham. 80% is male, 20% is female. And obviously that is female of all ages. I think one of the issues I've come across, not just in football, is conscious and unconscious bias. So there's almost a presumption that on occasion, when you phone in or you speak to people or you're in a group, that there's a presumption that as a woman, you won't have anything to contribute. You won't have anything to add. So the unconscious bias kicks in, as well as the clear and obvious bias. But I don't know if anybody else has ever come across that.
I think a lot of it, depending what generation you come from, I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and there weren't any really girls' football teams then. Girls just didn't do football. There was only a handful of us. And, you know, you need confidence, and you need to feel that you know what you're talking about if you're going to, certainly if you're going to go on a radio programme, for example. So I think a lot of women just lack that confidence to pick up the phone and comment about a game they've seen or you know what's going on at their football club, because they just don't feel that they've got that football background that most men have, because most men will have played football even if it's only at that school level. So clearly that's going to change, because you know, girls are now definitely playing football, which is brilliant and how it should be. But there is a generation gap, certainly, and I think it'll take a bit of time to get beyond that.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, because I was born in the 80s, so I was like growing up in the 90s, and it was still the case then. So me, for example, I've never virtually kicked a football in my life, just because it wasn't on offer at my school and I never got into it. So I think that is definitely a reason as well, because you might feel that you don't have the same inside knowledge that you would have, even if, like as Christine says, most men have played football, even if it is only at school. So you may be coming at it from a different angle, and people might perceive that as not being technical enough. And yeah, I think so, a generational thing. And just traditionally, we can't get away from the fact that traditionally football is a working class men's game. And so it can be intimidating as a woman to step into that and to kind of give your opinions, because you're almost just grateful to be accepted there, potentially.
So would you say that it's been a help that there are so many more women pundits in the game, that there are so many more women who are journalists, who are front and centre? I think certainly when it comes to broadcast media, we're seeing a lot more women nowadays. Do you think that will help, Sue? Will it give people like yourself the confidence to be able to speak up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very, very positive step. And the thing that I like about the women pundits and the reporters and the commentators is their professionalism and how they present and their knowledge. So picking up on what Hannah said, they're good examples. I mean, I don't tend to have a problem speaking up, but I think I can see Hannah's point. I think a lot of younger women, maybe, because, yeah, Christine's right. Girls didn't do football. I was actually told that by loads of people when I was a child. Oh, girls don't do football. They do netball. Okay. But I do think it's important to get a lot of women, as many women as possible, excellent role models up front and centre.
And we can't say, can we, that this is an issue now whereby we're just not hearing from certain generations. We're still not hearing from the younger generations. So, Hannah, contrary to what you're saying, I think there's quite a lot of young women coming through now who have played football. We know, don't we, off the back of the Euro, that there was 63% where in schools where it's offered, which would have been a stark increase. I mean, it needs to improve, as per the Lioness's letter to government. But I think the fact there is 63% means that there is a new generation of female football fan. But I don't hear those either. I listen to a lot of radio about football and I don't hear that many. So there has to be more reasons here, Christine, than just the generation and the access to the sport.
Yeah, I think so. But again, it's a confidence thing and it's an acceptance thing. So although there's many more girls now who are being exposed to football and are being given the opportunities to actually play and learn about the technical aspects, there is still this sort of perhaps a social aspect of well, it's not really still really not what girls do. And until we get beyond that, girls have to be accepted, women, female reporters, etc., presenters, for their actual abilities, rather than just the fact that, oh well, we don't want token women, let's put it that way. And there's no reason for that, because already there are many valuable women who know a great deal, have a great deal of expertise. But it's getting the right people doing the right things. And I say, I do feel that with anything in society, when you've got a big change in attitudes, it does take time to filter through. It will happen, but it does take time.
Yeah, I definitely think things are moving in the right direction. And I was just going to bring up the campaign Her Game Too, that I'm sure you've probably all heard of, because I think quite a lot of the women involved in that are like maybe in their 20s or kind of late 20s, although it does cover all ages. But I have seen online some of them receive like quite a lot of sexist kind of abuse still. So I think that is still a thing. Like, I try not to engage with that because I don't want the negativity, but when I have seen it, I have been surprised by some of the comments that men still make online that are quite sexist, and I suppose that might play into people not calling into radio shows if women have seen that kind of stuff.
Just to kind of add to what you're saying, Hannah, I think, well, Twitter, I think it is quite a toxic environment sometimes. I have known women who are involved in football trusts or football supporter groups who, due to Twitter responses, pile-ons, abuse, have actually ended up leaving their supporter rep role and their groups because they just can't face the Twitter abuse anymore. And a lot of it is sexist, vile filth. But they just say it's just not worth it anymore. So, I mean, that is another factor, I think.
Earlier, Hannah, you described it as a working class men's sport traditionally. So is the access for working class women, do you think, easier than for other women? I think we can't be too narrow in our thoughts here of what the female fan base looks like. There's a very diverse culture, more women going from different minority backgrounds, different sexualities, we've different generations. We've now got older women, younger women, and we can't put everyone in the same box.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to women going to football, maybe not necessarily it's so predisposed to being a working class game. And I think that has massively changed now anyway, just because of the pure cost of going to games. If you're looking to go to a Premier League game, you're not a season ticket holder. A one-off ticket, I was looking at going to the West Ham game the other day. The cheapest ticket is like £45. That is quite a lot of money. So I think football has changed in that way, away from being a working class person's game, which is another conversation really. But I think that because of that traditional thing of it maybe being something that men do together, it's almost like a bonding thing, that it's fear that they don't want that space to be like taken away from them, which is why I think positive conversations and engagement are so important, rather than always kind of dividing things up. And that was sort of what I wanted to do with my show, because I have taken it to some football clubs and non-traditional theatre audiences. And I think opening up those conversations, because maybe people don't always have the position to see things through other people's eyes, or they just don't think about it. So I think conversations are really important to try and make a more harmonious fan base where it's a safe place for everyone.
Well, all I would say, Hannah, for the first little bit, I think, one of the things that I found quite interesting was the fact that women did play football, and I'm going back a long, long while ago, and then it was banned. It was banned, which I think is just madness. So and then obviously it started up again, and the success of the Lionesses, etc., etc. I think you're right to a large extent around the bonding experience, and that some men, and this is the thing, it is only some men, don't necessarily like their, I don't want to say territory, but don't like other people that they perceive as not working class, which is a nonsense because the price of, as you've said, Premier League tickets is something else. They like to have their space, which is fair enough, but this is our game. It's not their game, it's our game. It's the game of everybody that follows, in my case, West Ham. In Christine's case, Blackpool. In your case, Coventry. It's our game. So I think over time, and with the right conversations and with the right role models and the right initiatives, I mean, I'm feeling quite positive that change will happen.
This is all about the women's voice in the game. Let's get to the actual terraces for a second. I suppose it's an old-fashioned word now, really, in these modern stadiums. But when it comes to joining in with chants, airing your opinion, you might be disgruntled with the referee over a decision, or you might be wanting more from one of your players. Do you feel you can air that? And I'd like to know that from you all individually.
Yes, I absolutely do, and I always have done. In fact, I find going to a match and being able to shout and get your frustrations out, it's actually quite therapeutic. I can't honestly say that I've ever felt intimidated at Blackpool. And even when I've gone with female friends as opposed to members of my family who were mainly male, apart from my mum, I've never felt that I couldn't join in or anything like that. Now I'm not keen on all the bad language and whatnot, but I don't think that's a male female thing. That's just me. So I don't join in those. But I do know people, and I know women who have said that they just don't feel that they're accepted, and I can see that because it is can be a very hostile and sometimes testosterone-fueled environment. I can say I can only speak about my own situation, and maybe that's just Blackpool and the people that I've always gone to games with. But I've always felt comfortable, and people are entitled to hear what I have to say.
Sue?
So I always shout, always chant, always join in. I've never felt that I shouldn't or can't. There are a couple of chants and things that have been shouted that I won't participate in because they're sexist. And I do actually feel uncomfortable to hear them sung. I mean, one of them involves the word shagging. This...
That's one of the new ones, isn't it? About I've heard that one was going around at West Ham. Yeah.
So this little 7-year-old girl turns and looks at her dad and says, "What does shagging mean, Daddy?" And the dad went absolutely scarlet, sort of, and then he changed the subject. But apart from that, I've never had any problem shouting, chanting, singing. But as I said, there are a couple of that what particular chant, and then when I think 2 seasons back they were being very explicit, shall I say, about Karen Brady.
Oh yeah.
And again, that's whatever you may or may not think of her, it's not appropriate what was being chanted or shouted. And again, I didn't join in. I did feel uncomfortable, but that's the only time in over 50 years. So.
Yeah, I mean, I always shout similarly to Christine. I can be very vocal. I don't mind the bad language to a point. Like there's certain words I'd rather not hear, but it doesn't bother me overly. So I always join in with the singing and stuff. But yeah, I did hear some of the sexist chants when I was going to West Ham, actually. And I think some of those things make me feel a bit uncomfortable. And I think that I was saying to someone else, there was one during the World Cup 2018, which was about Sweden, that the England fans were singing. And it wasn't particularly vile or explicit, but I think it's just a reminder as how women can still be seen as something to be brought into a chant in that way. like it's just sort of derogatory kind of thing.
Before we get a quick final thought from each of you, Christine and Sue, you both have positions at football clubs where you represent fan groups. How do they feel about a female representing them and their voice?
You want to go first, Christine?
Yeah, okay. Again, I think that because the route that I took to get involved was really at a time of all-out war at our football club. And because I really was speaking on behalf of the majority of Blackpool fans, I don't think at that point they were bothered, you know, what I was, as long as what I was saying was effective. And so I was very accepted and became quite well known. And now, obviously, most Blackpool fans at least have some idea who I was and what part I played in removing the previous owners. So I think perhaps, you know, that's given me a bit of a bye. But that said, since the trust started, which was in 2014, there's only ever been 3 women on Blackpool Supporters Trust Committee, and we're now down to just me. So, you know, we've elections coming up, and I feel it's my responsibility to try to encourage more women to get involved in that way, because, you know, there's still not enough women getting involved and speaking out.
Yeah, that's interesting actually, Christine, that you say that, because there's myself and another female on the West Ham Supporters Trust Board. There's 11 of us all together, or 10 of us on the actual board itself, and 2 of them are women. What do the supporters think? I would imagine there is a proportion of them that think, oh, bloody women. To be honest, I'm pretty sure they do. The majority seem to be okay, though. They seem to be okay with dealing with me. They seem to be okay with me representing them. Generally, it doesn't seem to be a problem. I think they've kind of got used to me yakking on all the time about either football or, you know, going to the club about one thing or another. So generally, it seems to be okay.
So when we think about encouraging more women's voices in the game going forward, just your final thoughts, what would you like to see change or more of? We'll start with you, Hannah.
I think it's just more of what we're getting, because I do agree with Sue that things are moving in the right direction. So I think it's just more reporters, more pundits. You know, there is quite a good split on Soccer Saturday, for example, now, more women calling into radio stations, because I guess on some hand it does start with us as well. And sometimes you might feel like you're not welcome in a space, but when you actually push through and go there, it isn't what you imagined it. So I think we can have our own preconceptions about how people are going to react to us as well. So I think just hearing more women's voices as we are starting to.
Christine?
I mean, again, I don't know if we're slightly affected by traditional roles in the home still being prevalent, because a lot of the women I speak to just say, oh, well, I'd like to, but I don't have the time, because they deal with the kids, they deal with the cooking, they deal with all these kind of things, the domestic stuff, and find that they just really, they've only just got time to go to the game. They don't really have time to do anything else.
Right.
So, you know, I think there's a lot of, there's an awful lot to be unravelled before we can move forward properly, but you know, like everybody else, I feel very positive about it, and it's happening.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I do feel positive. I like to think I'm a positive person. You know, you need to look forward. You need to be always pushing at that door, because the more you push, and the more of us that do push, the door will creak open. The only thing I would say is I'd like our football clubs, and that's all leagues, to really reflect on how female friendly they are. And it might be that they're very female friendly, so therefore they could promote and boast about that and act as role models for others. But just as they've worked, as all clubs have worked hard on their racial equality, which they should, etc., I would like to see all clubs look at male-female or female equality, and what are they actually doing within that arena.
Well, I think that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you very much to each of you. So, Hannah, Christine, and Sue, we appreciate your time. If you've been listening in at home and you want to share your views, do comment below, or you can get in touch on social media at We Are the FSA. Keep a lookout as well for the other Listening Project episodes too, covering a wide range of topics, including safety online and leadership in the game. There's one released every week for 6 weeks, and it's here to provoke thought and hopefully generate some solutions going forward. Take care and see you soon.